Hi, Tracy from SarahDarkMagic.com here, and I want to go over another RPG book I got from Gen Con last year, and this time it's Threadbare, Stitchpunk RPG, play a broken toy in a broken world. Threadbare is powered by the Apocalypse, which is a game system that I believe first came out with Apocalypse World. In order to play, you need 2 6-sided dice and a group of 2 to 5 friends. And similar to some of the other ones, I'm going to do a flip through and we'll just talk about the book and things I like. I had to get it right away just because I love the idea of toys, playing toys, in particular toys that are stitched together, random bits, and things like that. So one of the first things, there's the table of contents, the credit page, an introduction to Threadbare, what it's about, and in particular they talk a lot about lines and how you should not only play the game, but more importantly how you should communicate how you're going to play the game. So for instance, the game really is, as they say here, focused on building, making, repairing, and friendship. So the moves drive more towards those actions than necessarily quote-unquote combat. And it says there's no combat moves mechanically in the game. In addition, a lot of the powered by Apocalypse type games tend to be a little more adult in some ways. Like Apocalypse World itself has sex moves and stuff like that, or at least one. So they call out here that this really is meant to be a bit more of a PG-13 game, but really it's up to you and your friends and what level you're comfortable with. Things that probably people should know about, and that's why it's called Boundaries and Content Notes, is that if you're uncomfortable with body horror, dismemberment, and cannibalism, this may not be the best game for you, just because some people will, as we take parts from one toy to put it on another, there can be a fair bit of dismemberment and body horror feelings there. Characters themselves don't have genitals. You know this if you've ever seen a Barbie or a Ken doll. That doesn't mean you can't decide to have that in there. And then also ableism and disability become very different in a world where it is unlikely that you are an unbroken toy. Not that people who are disabled are necessarily broken, but just in terms of pretty much everyone has some sort of disability. And yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff you can get into quite quickly with this game, but you don't have to. It can just be a lighthearted. It can also be a lighthearted book. Game. The other thing is they don't really do races. There's differences in the broad categories of toys. So there's mecha, softies, and socks. But there's nothing beyond that. And then they point to some areas of ways of dealing with if something becomes too uncomfortable and is impacting play, how to handle changing it. So then it goes into a whole thing about how to play. These stages here talk about, like, Scruffy is PG-13, Fluffy is a G-rated movie, and then Dented is their term for when you want to go beyond that to something like an R-rated movie or beyond. The core of Apocalypse, powered by Apocalypse things, are your moves. And these are specific, so there are some general moves that are available to everyone, and then for each type of character, like the softies, mechas, and socks, they'll have moves that are very specific to their group. And then they've abstracted out your what you use, what you kind of collect and stuff like that. So there's stuff, that's the bits and pieces that you just pick up, and then you can take stuff and turn that into other things. when you name stuff, it becomes a thing that you have, and then eventually there's a group of items called devices. Devices are things that have specific moves attached to them, so it's all very abstracted out. And then over the course of play, you're likely to take damage. You can repair it. You can do things like influencing others and all that stuff. And then basic moves, these are listed again at the end of the book. And then information on how to make your character. One thing that they talk about too is that you can have personality parts. These are things that really are key to your personality, and your character would be changed if you no longer had. And then you can have unbreakable parts. You can't list it on your parts list, and thus it cannot be lost or damaged. But it also has a limited impact in the world. So these are things that, again, if you feel like it would no longer be your character if you didn't have it, you'd want to protect it in that way. But that means also that it can't be, you can't say I have a shotgun and then it has a huge impact on what you're able to do. And each character type gets a number of parts, the starting parts. So here's the mechas. Your move is salvage parts. There's a friendship move. These are things that you can do to create ties with other characters, and that also has mechanical advantages. And then different, even within each like mecha, softie, and sock, there are different types. So there's a bunch of little guys, just swarm of plastic toys. And then these have a special, like, when you roll a 6 minus, one of your guys becomes separated, you damage one part and gain a +1 hold. They can ask the GM a question when you're seeking information about the world around you. And then you have 12 starting parts because a bunch of little guys. Doll face, again, you have a special, like, if your hold, this is how you gain hold, which is something that you can spend to do things in the game. Batteries not included and no strings attached. These are your forms, that's what they call them, sorry. More than meets the eye. Rock solid, these are great because tons of these for gaming. And then socks are different types of socks: athletic, Christmas, wool, so on. And finger puppets are counted as socks. Softies are different types of soft toys, so ragdoll, built like a bear, hand puppet, stuff like that. And then there's information about the game master. And I think one thing I'd like to point out at this point is, if you haven't really played Apocalypse World, like, as I said, you need 2d6, and what you do is you roll that, plus you add your akin to ability scores. There's Scrounge, Smile, and Strong Arm. So crafting and trade, making friends, influencing people, and influencing the world. So you roll your 2d6 and you add whatever your ability score is. So it's either a +2, a +1, or a -1. And if you haven't played and if you've never played a game where you roll 2d6, this is kind of the distribution you get just on a normal 2d6, which means, and then I broke it up into the categories of 6 or less, 7 to 9, or 10 or more. So just without any bonuses or penalties, you're likely to get 15 for the first group, 6 or less, 15 for 7 to 9, and only 6 combinations lead to a 10 or more. As you get +1 or +2, you see these numbers change dramatically, and then the same with negatives. And the important part of this is that if you're trying to do things outside of what your character is good at, the likelihood of failure is pretty high, and honestly it never gets that small. You still have 6 out of 36 if you have a +2. So it's likely that you're gonna fail, and often when you fail, what happens is you have to you end up breaking one of your parts, and then you damage one part. So for some characters, a lot of these have 6 to 8, 9 here, of those. But it's a game where you're kind of meant to fail a bit, and that's okay too. And one thing to note about characters in Threadbare is that unless folks decided that this is what should happen, they really don't die. And then the other thing to note is, so 6 or less is when you damage a part. 7 and 9 is when you succeed, but there's often a complication, and then 10 or more is a success. So I think in this game it really, and I've played some Apocalypse World, but I haven't played much of it, or powered by Apocalypse games, but this requires a lot of the game master can be really important here in terms of making this interesting, given how heavily weighed it can be to failure. Not that failure's not a bad thing, but to make it interesting isn't always easy, and then there's the whole complication matter as well. So a lot of information here on how to run things, how to run an adventure, kind of trying to take player choices in terms of when they pick a form, what type of game they want to play. And I think the one caveat I will have here is that this is take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm notorious for picking things not because of because it's the quote unquote right way or what people expect someone to do with something, but rather because some other portion of it appealed to me, or I'm gonna play slightly contrary to its nature because I like that tension too. And then you can upgrade. Upgrades are the core advancement mechanic in Threadbare. So you can make upgrades to your character, and these things also can give, like, +1 to smile when you lead a cheer, when you have new paint, and bonuses as well. So, and then you can also add devices. These are a temporary upgrade to your character. Tools. So, and there's lots of recipes here too for things that you need in order to make some of these. And then information on creating new moves, which is important because, as we learned earlier, devices are a way to create moves, and devices should be, as they point out here, multiple steps or even a quest to create. So it's not like, oh, I went into this room, found this thing, and now I have a device. The next thing the book goes into is the World of Threadbare, and thinking about what it is areas of it. So the caverns, Zephyr Express, called by the Zephex by those who live here, Amuse Funland, the Deep Blue, the Wetlands. Just areas that if you suddenly awoke as a toy, you might find yourself in. And then the history of Threadbare. And finally, some adventures. So they have some core adventures, is the way I think I would put it, that they included in here. So Flurry Road, Flight of the Bumblebee. And what's great is they have these things to help easily make choices to start the adventure off, which is good because you can run through these multiple times and have them be different every time, and then it breaks up into scenes. The other big thing is in the GM section, and you can see it here. There's always a like how the scene ends, and there's typically also how the adventure ends. Like when would you say that this story is done? Now that can change if you pick something at the beginning and something else comes up. It's possible to change it, but always a concern in these types of games is that people don't know how to have that closure to things, and then there's an epilogue at the end where the player characters get to talk about like where they are, what they're doing, stuff like that. And then they have a bunch of adventures, or at least adventure starters that are slightly different format that actually tell you the author. And as you might remember from my previous one on the baby bestiary, I love this because it helps you find authors that you might be interested in to read more on the future. So, like this one's all about dance, boogie shoes, the Senate of Toys, so they're voting, and then there's like an example mini game, which you can use in the course of games as well, because there are, for instance, I think mechas have a friendship move where if they play a game, they can create ties. And then the last part is there's actually a bunch of tutorials for particularly if you're into crafting, how you can create your own physical Threadbare toy by taking apart other toys, which I just thought was awesome. And anytime I can get the power tools out, I really like it. I won't lie. And then there's a bunch of appendices, a list of moves, people who helped contribute, and review. This was a kickstarted game. Basic moves reference sheet. Oh, and I want to point this out too. They apparently have an area on their blog where people can where they can share like if you create your own adventure starter or stuff like that, they may share it, and if the work is chosen to be published in an anthology, they'll pay for it. I wish it didn't quite say what you are and aren't allowed to do, so I would look that up first, but definitely seems like cool. I love community based sharing. And then they have sample playbooks back here. So you pick your form, it tells you your moves, your paired up, and your friendship. The only thing I noticed, and then when you pick your form, you get your hold. And that's it, and then an index. So definitely seems like a fun game. Keep in mind again how 2d6 tends to translate. It's either going to push you into doing the things that you're particularly good at, or if you're risk averse. But if you have a group of friends who aren't that risk averse, it could lead into some interesting territory. Anyways, thanks, and have a great day.